to start, thank you all for coming, and I'm eager to hear your questions about synopsis writing, and hopefully this is really informative and helpful. If you are looking to ask some questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I think when the timer goes to 3:30 Eastern, it'll have like a Q&A section. If you've been in any of the other panels, you'll notice that. So I'm happy to answer those near the end. So we'll get started shortly, maybe like 2 minutes past 3:30. All righty, we got a couple more people trickling in. We'll get started in a couple minutes. So again, thanks for attending, and I hope it's very informative. Let's see, I don't think we've got any more people coming. It looks like we can start shortly. Okay, and now that the Q&A has popped in, I think it would be helpful to start. All right. So, good afternoon. My name is Megan Harris, and I'm here to chat with you all about synopsis writing. So I've decided to call this one Handy Advice on Synopsis Writing for Neurodivergent Authors. And you don't have to be an author to attend this, of course, but I wanted to focus it because a lot of people attending are authors or could be helping authors to write a synopsis. So here we are. We're going to focus on that audience and kind of start with the agenda next. Okay, so this is what we will cover today. I will share a little bit about who I am. Again, we'll talk about what a synopsis entails and some of those common questions people ask. I'm going to talk about some tips that don't work and why that is, what the research says, and finally some actionable steps before getting to the Q&A. And like I said before we got started, feel free to add questions in the Q&A as I'm speaking. I do plan to answer them when I complete the last actionable steps slide at the end. So looking forward to chatting with you all about this topic. So a little bit about me. Like I said, my name is Megan Harris. There's a handy pic of me. Are you able to see my screen? Okay, sorry. Before I keep going, someone sees everything, or I guess I'm wondering what skewed might mean. Tilted to the side. Okay, I'm not sure, but we're gonna keep going. Hopefully this will work out on YouTube if you are having issues, and I apologize if you are having issues with it. But like I said, I am Megan Harris. This is synopsis writing, and this is a little bit about me. I'm located in the Midwest in the United States. I live maybe an hour outside of St. Louis. I've been an indie editor for over 10 years now. I primarily edit romance, urban fantasy, and horror, but I'm not afraid of touching other types of genres. Why I chose synopsis writing is a lot of the next bullet point, which is marketing background. I work in my day job in marketing, and I'm really passionate about helping authors understand their marketing. And part of that is understanding synopsis writing and putting your copywriter hat on instead of just fiction writing or nonfiction, if you are here for nonfiction. I think marketing is a really good skill to have and an asset, and things like synopsis writing help build that skill. Finally, I'm a mom of 3. It's kind of why I'm here. I decided to get involved in this community because I have a child with ADHD, and my spouse is also has ADHD. So I'm learning from my writer friends and from everybody about what it's like to live with someone who has ADHD. And I think it really informs me as a service provider for people who are looking for that help, because the needs are different from neurotypical folks. So let's dive into what a synopsis is. So the traditional definition of what a synopsis is a brief summary of a work such as a book, TV show episode, film, etc. We are obviously here to talk about synopsis for books. When you are submitting a synopsis, typically the guidelines are between 500 to 1,000 words, although those guidelines can vary. When I'm working with clients, they often need 500 to 600 words, if that's helpful. And I think that's primarily because of what the agents are looking for, what the publishers might need. That 500 to 600 is usually a pretty big standard that I've seen. So I put in 500 to 1,000 here because some guidelines want more, and sometimes you can get away with more words, but sometimes keeping it shorter is better. Finally, you need to write a synopsis in third person with present tense. And that just helps to inform the reader, which we'll go into that audience in a second, more about your book. So some common questions I get is, how is something like a synopsis different than sales copy? And that's a great question, because your sales copy needs to be really catchy. Think of your pitch, think of how you might sell your book to like a TV show, make it into a TV show. How are you going to grab some audience with that? Your synopsis does not do that job. That would be your sales copy for your book blurbs. That would be your website copy. That would be, how do you pitch your book to on video to an audience? Your sales copy does that job. A synopsis is a factual accounting of your book. It's informational. You can almost think of it as like the minutes of your book. So I bring that up because, like, I'm the secretary for my kids' PTA. The minutes are important to keep, and it tells you a factual accounting of what's happening. So that is important to think about when you write a synopsis. Who's the audience for a synopsis? You may also hear people ask. It is not necessarily your readers. It's most likely your agents, your editors, your publishers. They want to know if this book is something that they want to dive more into, or they can compare your synopsis with the actual samples you may give. So that helps them, it helps inform them what to expect. Finally, another question I get asked a lot about synopses, I suppose, synopses is, do I put in spoilers? Yes, spoilers are recommended as part of writing a synopsis. You do not want to hold back on what's going to happen. That is something that people often get confused with, and also distinguishes a synopsis from writing sales copy. Your sales copy doesn't want to give everything. You need to entice them in. A synopsis will tell you everything. So do not hold back and putting spoilers. You should put those in there. So let's talk about some tips that don't work and why they don't work. First of all, let's talk about the tip where people say, just time box it, like put an hour in and then you're good to go. This is really well-meaning for folks who are neurodivergent, but it does not validate the true scope of struggles someone who is neurodivergent may have to overcome, such as executive functioning. You need to have the bandwidth or the mana or the spoons to complete a synopsis so that you can actually get it all done. So just time box it is not a helpful tip. We're going to cross that one out. It's not helpful. So another tip you may hear people say is, oh, like make a list. Just list out all the things you have to do, and then your synopsis will get done. Not a good tip. We're going to cross that one out. And that's because this helps neurotypical people who may thrive on making a list, who may decide like, yeah, the list is my ride or die is my list. I can complete this if I have a list. Another well-meaning tip, but ultimately not helpful, because if you don't have the spoons to complete a list, how are you going to complete a synopsis in the end? So unhelpful. And finally, this last one, it can be really hard to see, but the tip that I find that does not work for anybody who's neurodivergent is just try harder. Like, aren't you doing enough? Can't you just you wrote a whole novel? Can't you write a synopsis? We're crossing that one out. We're not here to shame people. This is a shaming statement. It's hurtful. Many neurodivergent people are doing their best, and this advice just leads to frustration and generally does not make them want to do the thing. And the thing we're talking about today is synopsis writing. Yeah, you wrote a whole book. We don't know the scope of how long it took you to write that book, but to compile it into a very concise couple pages is a really big hurdle. And so how can we actually overcome it with actionable steps that help someone who may be facing different obstacles and barriers? And let's talk about what those look like. So, what does the research say about something like synopsis writing? So, what we know is that students who have ADHD or ADD, other types of neurodivergences, may struggle with writing. And we all know that this is a nuanced statement. There are many writers who are very hyper focused and can finish a book. They set up themselves with all the structures to do that. But writing something like a synopsis can be a new type of barrier. And so, yeah, you've already written a novel, but comparing a synopsis to a full-length book is like comparing apples and oranges. They may be in the same family of being a fruit, but an apple and an orange are not the same, and a synopsis and writing a book are not the same. So the obstacles are there for sure, especially when you consider that many adults who have ADHD may not be diagnosed, so they don't have those support systems. They don't have the systems that can help with those kinds of things, or they may have other barriers, such as someone with autism may have other types of barriers outside of what someone with ADHD has. All those types of things have to be considered when you think of how can I overcome the obstacle of writing a synopsis. This is a little long for me on slides, but I promise you it'll be worth it. This is part of a Twitter thread from this researcher, the assistant professor of psychology at Brandeis. And she talked a lot about how the college experience and executive dysfunction, they're like oil and water. So large tasks with a long time horizon, sounds familiar, right? Like a synopsis, put maximum demands on executive dysfunctioning, or EF, as she abbreviated here. They require extensive planning, breaking down steps, and time management. And if you have EF difficulties, this can lead to procrastination and anxiety. I know that building something like a synopsis can be something that invokes these things. You could find yourself delaying it or being really anxious about it. And just like with the college experience, building something like a publishing career can come with barriers that you have to overcome. And I felt this quote really highlights how even in spaces where we expect structure, like a college or university setup, the support is not always there. But we can find solutions ourselves when we're talking about publishing to that are better designed for the neurodivergent crowd. And I think it's really helpful to think of those and get into that now that we've talked about, like, what does the research say? We don't want to get into procrastination and anxiety. It can happen, and it's difficult when it does, but how can we structure what we're planning to do in a way that helps us actually achieve our goal, which is synopsis writing? So we start with scaffolding as an actionable step. This is one of many actionable steps I'll go over. But basically, scaffolding is where you create the structure needed to complete the task. Since you can't just wing something like a synopsis, it's better to set up regular tasks and benchmarks to get it done. So, for instance, deadlines. Is there a deadline you can set to complete the synopsis? Sorry, I'm just pausing to see the chat. The images on slides are not showing, it says. I do have, on my end, I'm not really sure what's happening, and I'm really sorry about that. But there are like little images next to them. So let's go back into this. When we are looking at something like deadlines, you have to think about your time horizon and give yourself enough leeway between that date and how to plan to chunk them out in between. So maybe that means reading a few chapters at a time to create your synopsis. And maybe that means taking notes to refresh your memory. That can all help in finding a way to scaffold what you're doing. So that would be what I would recommend if you are starting to make your synopsis, is to start with scaffolding. One way to do this is setting SMART goals. So if you've never really heard of SMART goals, it is an acronym. It is not meant to say other goals are not smart, but it means specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And so instead of just saying, like, I want to write a synopsis, don't be afraid to set up goals that are much more specific, such as I'm going to read 3 chapters, measurable, again, 3 chapters, summarize them in a document by the end of each week. There's your timely part, kind of near the end of smart. Achievable, that can you do these goals within the time you have allowed yourself? Those are all helpful to find. And realistic, is this realistic for your abilities and your needs? Don't be afraid to push yourself, of course, but maybe if you decide that 3 chapters is too much, scale it back to 1 chapter a week. Scale it to 3.5 chapters. Set up objectives that you can actually achieve as you're going through it. Another actionable step I actually learned from a mutual on TikTok. Her name is Christy Nicholas, and she told me that she really benefited from the snowflake method. If you've never heard of the snowflake method, it is something developed by author Randy Ingermanson. And basically, you begin with a central idea and build off of it with increasing complexity. And I think this is really helpful to think about when you are working on something like a synopsis. She actually told me that she built her synopsis before she even wrote her novel because she has OCD tendencies, and this was something that helped her whittle down the job into bite-sized pieces. And I found that really fascinating. So I wanted to share with you all. In addition to that, because of her OCD tendencies, she said that it helped her build like an extreme planning book for authors, which if you need something like that, that's a really cool resource I thought would be helpful to have. So the snowflake method, there you go. You build it off your central idea. Maybe you can do this like Christy did before she wrote her novel, or you decide to do it after. Whatever you find works for you is the way to approach your synopsis. There is no one-size-fits-all method for everybody. And finally, we have even more tips. Yay! So these are all meant to be tips that can help you to build out your synopsis and be successful with it and not get down on your goals. So seeking out support is the number one goal I put in here, because this helps you to find ways that you can work with other people and really make sure that you can meet your goal, which is writing a synopsis. Ask a friend to keep you accountable. Maybe set up check-ins every week. This can help you to talk to each other and keep each other accountable. And maybe this person's also working on a synopsis or some other project. You can ask them questions. They can ask you questions, and that'll help you to do those things. I also put in here an actionable step is accepting your limits. Be gentle with yourself. It's okay if this is hard and you need more time to do it than you anticipated. You can work through this. And some ways you might find are helpful would be seeing if music can help you. Are you someone that needs specific type of music? Are you light sensitive? Many people who do have autism may be light sensitive throughout the day, and working on screens can be really time intensive and also difficult when you have that sensitivity. So taking frequent breaks is helpful. Understanding those challenges and adapting to them really can help you be successful in this. You might try gamifying it. So if you're somebody that needs little rewards to make it through the writing of a synopsis, try doing that. So we talked before about like time boxing. Rather than doing that, can you see how much you can get done throughout the day? Like the Pomodoro method. Lots of people love setting a timer and saying, okay, how far can I get doing XYZ thing? So if today you need to read a chapter, can you read that chapter in 20, 30 minutes? Or how far can you get into that story in 20, 30 minutes and then take a break and go from there? And if you get to that break time, maybe you push yourself and do another chapter. You have to find the method that works best for you. And, the one thing that's I think is really interesting from talking with somebody about this presentation who works with special education, he said that you can never have too many incentives to achieve your goals. So when he's working on an IEP with somebody, those breaks are sometimes an incentive to somebody. And you can never have too many incentives to achieve a goal of creating something like a synopsis, because that can be very helpful for you. And it's not an indulgence. It's basically a way to help you achieve that goal and give yourself a little bit of that dopamine hit that people have talked before about in presentations. Finally, if you're having some difficulty with it, try out something like dictation. Even as somebody who considers themselves mostly neurotypical, I find that dictation can help just to get the story out there if I'm working on something, or even to start summarizing something. So when we think like at a high level about a book or a story and we want to tell it to somebody, we may start automatically, summarizing it in some way. And you have to do this within your synopsis. So if you know the overall idea of your story, you can try using something like a voice to text app or recording yourself talking about it, and then using that recording to build your synopsis. And before you know it, you might be uncovering a high level point of view for starting a synopsis and having it be built out from there. So very helpful to just keep working through it in that way. And before you know it, you'll have created a synopsis just like you planned. So I hope these have been really helpful steps that you can find as achievable steps and can help you build a synopsis or even create one for a client if you happen to be here as an editor or service provider. For me, I think it's helpful to think about it as a summary of sorts. Like I said at the beginning, it's factual, it's informational, and how can you find that thread throughout the story that holds all that together? Taking these steps can help you do that. So I find that to be like a really great way of doing so. And so now we can open up for questions. Feel free to add some in the chat if you haven't already, and I'm happy to answer them here on video. So we've had lots of really good feedback here from people about different apps that'll help. Brain.fm, that's a really cool one I'll have to look into also. And Focus Meet, I'm not sure I've heard of that one, but I love that. That's a really good idea to do that. Was it Timo with 2 eyes? Very cool. Thanks for sharing that one. I love hearing those kinds of resources for it. But if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'm sorry if some of you had some difficulty with the slides themselves. But the good news is if you want to access them later, you can feel free to message me and I will provide the full deck to you. I'm not shy from doing that. If you need it as a PDF, I can export it. Or if you just want like the Google Slides link, that works too. We had somebody recommend Forest. Oh, I think I've heard of that one where you can grow a plant or a tree when you do focus sessions. I feel like I need that in my day job sometimes. It's helpful to think about that for sure, because then you're like, it's like how Tamagotchis work. You're like, growing it from the bottom up. Very nice. Cool. I'm going to see if we have any questions in the Q&A. Oh, is there? I am not seeing it. Thanks, Dana. Let me see. The one I see here is from the last session, actually. But if I'm missing it, please let me know. Okay, so Monty asked, how do you know what to cut out when your synopsis is way too wordsy? Okay, I love this tip, and I'm happy to provide some ideas here. So when I'm working on a synopsis, I don't know if this is an approach that you all might find helpful, but I will go through each chapter, kind of write my own sort of summary of it, and then start to chunk it down. When I'm trying to cut out a synopsis that is way too wordy, I check for things like passive voice, and I check for things like adverbs. Those tend to be really, at least in my experience when I'm working on it, something like a synopsis, you need to get that word count down, right? So cutting out those adverbs helps, making it more actionable helps. Making sure that you're not putting words like that or just, like all those words that tend to be kind of stumbling blocks for people. They can be what is making it too wordy. And so when I'm working on one, that's what I do, is I just chunk it down to the base story of it. And I've been able to do it pretty successfully for lots of really big projects. So for instance, one was a historical fiction novel, and it was 150,000 words and covered 3 generations of a family. And despite this being the length it was, my notes were still in the 5,000 word range, and I was able to chunk it down to be a synopsis of 600 words. So doing it that way helps you to see like what's the big picture, and then like how can we get to like the main focus of the story. Okay, Maggie asks, what is the difference between a character synopsis and a story synopsis? Mostly what I'm covering here is a story synopsis. I think a character synopsis could be a couple different things. A character synopsis sounds a little bit to me kind of like a character sheet or like a character list that people build out. which could be much more related to what the character's motives are, what that character is like. That's how I picture something like a character synopsis. Story synopsis is a lot more like what I was covering here. So I hope that kind of helps explain the difference a little bit. All right, let's see. Oh, another question here. I hope I say your name right. I can. Anksha said, do you have any recommendations for disrupting that sort of hyperfocus while reading things? I'm more of an editor than a writer, but I do write book/movie/show reviews for fun sometimes. I find that taking notes throughout is helpful, but sometimes I find myself getting super immersed and then end up forgetting details. Even if I say I'll stop at two chapters for now to jot down my thoughts and set an alarm, I sometimes ignore it. Very good question. So for me, if I'm working on something and I know I need a stopping point, I will spin ahead to that stopping point and put a note. So it may be something I'm doing in Word, or if it's like a physical copy of something, I will bookmark it and say, this is the stopping point. Timers can help if you find that, like, if you have some idea of how long it takes you to read a section, then a timer to say, okay, this chapter should probably only take 20 minutes, and then you get to that point and stop. And it says that you set an alarm and you ignore it. That maybe means you need a different sound for an alarm, or like a vibration or some sort like that. I use a Fitbit a lot for things, and if I need a quiet timer that will not disturb my kids or disturb me, or if I'm in a setting where like a timer on my phone would just be too disruptive, I will put it on my watch and then it vibrates on my wrist, and then I can move on to things and realize, oh, that is for this thing that I'm doing. So hopefully that kind of helps. Maybe disrupting what your sound is for your alarm could do it, or like I said, some kind of vibration, or bookmarking a place to say, okay, now I need to stop here. Okay. So Maggie says, should we personalize the synopsis for the agent we are submitting to, or can we write a generalized synopsis for all submissions? I would suggest a general synopsis, because from what I've read from lots of people, and this is just me following lots of folks on Twitter and passively understanding the agent market, because I do work with indies more than folks looking for agents, is most people feel like if they have been working on submitting to agents and they do personalize it, it doesn't work any more effectively than a general synopsis. So I would make your letters personalized, but I would not make a personalized synopsis unless they need personalized word counts. So if it is a different type of word count, I would change it in that way. Okay, I'm sorry about pronouncing your name wrong. Let's see. Lori says, I've heard of writers creating their synopsis before writing the story and then modifying it after the story is written. Yes, I think that may be what the author I referenced in my my presentation was doing, is they did a general one and then they expanded and changed it from there. But I think it's like admirable to do that, because for me, I feel like when I write, this has nothing to do with the editing process, but if I'm writing something, I want to write it and then do a summary. But if other people find it helpful to do the synopsis and a summary and then write, like, kudos to you. That's really good world building and planning, and I think it is helpful to think of. We all think in different ways, so that's really cool to think about. And then for Monty, how do you know what details are not necessary to include in the synopsis? That is a really contextual one that is hard to answer. For me, I think it's the details that are most important are the ones related to the central plot. So the big one I told you about, the 150,000 word historical fiction book with 3 generations, the central themes that I've included and the details were related to a conflict in the story. The family that was the main focus had a conflict with another family that was the main focus. And so there were lots of other stories woven in that, lots of other family members, but the main focus was these 2 groups together in conflict. And so it was pretty simple for that example to focus on that in it, even though my notes were like 5,000 words. It does help to kind of think about what is the driving plot here and what is most helpful to explain and include those spoilers, like I said. Those are the details that I think are most helpful. And this also kind of goes back to your question about the word count. If you're struggling within it and there's just a lot of like details that add to it but don't like move the synopsis forward in a way to get to a conclusion, then those details can probably be cut out. So For example, I'm working on a synopsis right now, and within the notes I have, there are lots of background details that may be summed up in like a sentence or two by the time everything is done, because they're helpful for me now when I am working on it. But when it comes to that final product, we're going to need to have just a really tight summary of what's happening and who the characters are and who the major characters are, because at the time I'm working on it, I'm still uncovering like who the big players are and how important it is to include them. So having those big picture notes and then whittling it down is kind of the best approach I've found, but everybody does a different approach. So that would be what I would say to do, is include your notes. And if there are things that feel important, like put those in a different document for later. And then if you need them again, you find, oh wait, like the main thread is actually this other thing, you still have those notes to pull from. Okay, so I see some more Q&A stuff. These might all be the questions we have. Okay, Stephanie asked, what are some great examples of the synopsis? If you can add a little more on what that means, that would be great. I don't have any synopsis examples in my slide, and a resource I would recommend to do that. I could definitely find you some resources on that. But essentially, it is very helpful to look at other examples if you can, talk to other writers and see what has helped them, and talk to an editor. Like that's why I'm here, is to let you know that like these kinds of services are out there. If you struggle to write a synopsis yourself, part of that slide of about the tips was support, and editors can help you do those things. I've even worked with people who've had somebody else edit it, and then they're like, hey, you know what, actually I need a synopsis too, and then I come into play. Or if we are working on a line edit, they decide, you know what, I'm going to need a synopsis for when I pitch this, so will you do the synopsis too? So that's a helpful way to like combine projects, and maybe even save you some time and money. So let's see, we have Akanksha said, I like going to the library and reading random book synopsis, and I use Storygraph. Yes, I've heard so many good things about Storygraph. I still need to get on it. Trying to move away from Goodreads. It's partly why. To look at synopsis examples. Thank you so much for sharing this resource. I've heard so much good about Storygraph. I think a lot of people are finding it's a very helpful way to see what a synopsis looks like. And if you need more examples, like I said, there's lots of authors out there who have written them. I feel a little averse to sharing the ones I've written for clients with people, but sometimes people find that's helpful too. So, and Dana has also shared in the chat a resource from bryndonovan.com. So I'm including this also in the audio, so that if people who don't see the chat see this in YouTube later, you can search bryndonovan.com and look for a resource on how to write a synopsis with examples. Those are super helpful to have for sure. So yeah, I think that's helpful to have. Oh, okay. Dana also says she's having trouble loading the page. So if that does not work for you, searching things for like synopsis examples is helpful too. Hopefully I have answered some questions here about that. But yeah, if you have any questions about what it's like working with an editor or a service provider about synopsis, like for your synopsis, what I really find is helpful is to come with lots of those questions before you hire somebody, and really understand what kinds of services they offer around that. I myself, like I said, I've worked with people who pair it with editing, or if they've already published a book, they're like, hey, I kind of need this now. Then they come back and they say, hey, let's work together. But don't be afraid to ask for help and ask those questions before you hire somebody. And if you find that you're wanting to do it yourself, like the resources here can be really a good way to do that. So, okay. And an update on the link for the YouTubers out there. The link does work now that Dana has shared. Like I said, you search Bryn Donovan, BRYN Donovan.com, and synopsis examples. You should be able to find some good things out there. So that's helpful to see. Yeah. Well, we can still go through Q&A here, but I also wanted to thank you all for your time. Like I said, I work on this often with clients who have either completed an editing project with me, or they've edited their book with somebody else and they decide they need a synopsis later. So my current availability is in May. I'm just pretty booked right now with the current projects. And I love working on these types of things with clients along with other types of editing. So if you ever want to connect, you can find me primarily on TikTok and Twitter, but I have a Facebook page too. Most service providers have that kind of thing. And yeah, I'm happy to provide the slides if anybody wants them at a later date and had any trouble seeing them. There will be a recording on YouTube, of course. But yeah, like I love writing synopsis type of projects for people. And I also open to editing a synopsis for people in the past. I've done that too. If you have one and you just need someone to like tighten it up, I'm your girl. Monty asked, do agents always require synopsis? Not always. I would definitely check each agent's requirements. Query Match, I think, is a resource a lot of people use to find out who is open, and they can also see their guidelines and what they need. So it's not always a requirement, but I would definitely recommend having one just in case. Like, let's say you pitch to an agent and that agent doesn't work out. Well, now you've got to take the approach of now you got to create a synopsis for the next one. Having it on hand is helpful. And may help you in the future if you decide to do things like pitch it to someone else, or if someone's like, hey, I'd like to know a summary of your book for other reasons, then they might use it that way. One thing I think would be helpful if you're using a synopsis and you're not pitching it to someone is if you're working with partnerships. Maybe somebody wants to partner with you on your book and they want to share it with people, but they don't have the time to sit and read the whole story. They might ask for something like a synopsis. I could see that being something a partner would like to see if they're going to put it in the newsletter or something. So definitely other uses outside of agents, but I think that's primarily the big uses: agents, editors, and publishers. So yeah, that's about it for me. I think I can give you all a little bit more time back. But thank you again. I really appreciate all the great questions here, and really hope that this was helpful. So if you have other questions, you can find me after, or if you just want to talk about other things, I'm going to be floating around Gather. So thanks again, and have a good one.